Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. You can hear me okay? Thank you, SNP, and thank you to all our panelists for attending today. And sorry for the technical difficulties, but I think we can jump right into it. So, earlier in the day, we heard some very compelling scientific evidence regarding consumption of seafood and how it improves health and supports immune systems, but we're still not meeting dietary guidelines to eat seafood twice a week. That would put us about 26 pounds per person. Presently, we're at about 16 pounds per capita. So, Jason, I'd like to kick it off with you. What are some of the challenges that need to be addressed? Does seafood need to become more consumer friendly as a product? And do we need more consumer or scientific research?
Well, thanks for the question, Ned. And first of all, it's great to be with everyone today, and I've really enjoyed all the presentations. When talking about increasing seafood consumption, I think product development and innovation go hand in hand with driving more confidence with consumers, particularly those who are new to seafood or don't eat it frequently. So we're certainly seeing more fresh innovation in seafood as companies are engaging to help with chefs, retooling their operations, or utilizing enhanced packaging to make seafood friendlier and more enjoyable. So those are good things that help drive more people into the category and build their confidence. What tends to be a challenge is the story and messaging of seafood. And I think that tends to get a bit fragmented, confusing, and often misleading depending on where people's sources of information come from. One of the challenges is that seafood gets portrayed as an environmental issue, so to speak, that must be contained. And that's very far from the truth, considering the great advancements in technology and environmental monitoring. We actually need to unleash seafood as a solution for our future and grow production in a responsible manner. And with that challenge, we see another one in that the U.S. does not produce enough seafood for demand. So when we're talking about that 16 pounds of seafood consumption per capita, U.S. seafood is a small part of that, and that needs to change. COVID-19 has taught us a lot of things, and national food security should be high on the list with expansion of industries like seafood and helping our domestic fisheries while incentivizing the growth of aquaculture in this country, which is tragically low in terms of output. And on that topic, I don't believe other proteins have the complexity messaging as seafood does. Domestic versus import, wild versus farm. I don't think there's really any hot debates about farm chickens versus wild chickens, but there is certainly in seafood and regional messaging and so forth. So there's a lot of complexity there. So in addition to having a cohesive message on nutritional benefits of seafood, we need to have a cohesive message on seafood in general across this country and play a more active role in educating the public. And I'll ask our health professionals to help with this because we need the help of physicians, nutritionists, health consultants to guide people in a way that doesn't say things like, well, I want you to have seafood in your diet, but eat wild, not farm. And I hear that often. I'm not saying our guests in today's meeting are doing this because they're here to actually help us grow consumption. But I hear it often, and the advice is to ignore seafood from over half the world's production, which is very dangerous, and I think ends up hurting our objective of growing seafood consumption in general.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So, Paul, let me turn over to you. And what do you think are some of the key considerations for growing seafood consumption in the U.S.?
Oh, thank you, Ned. And it's really hard to add to the really compelling and quite broad points that Jason just made, starting with this point on innovation. And this is something that's just been taken off and I think is a silver lining in some respects to the current circumstances that we're in. A lot of innovation in product form, thinking about different ways that people can consume seafood, to the point of seafood not necessarily always even being the key ingredient in a product. So there's a whole array of different product forms, and we're kind of shifting from the world of frozen fish sticks, which is still going to be important, is still a very helpful source of high quality seafood, But we need a whole lot of other options too. And Trident's got surimi noodles on the market. There's an incredible growth and interest in seaweed-based food products, and the ability to grow seaweed super sustainable. So there's, I think, a great deal of benefit in that kind of product innovation taking place. And the only thing I'll add to Jason's point there is that it's really important that we're looking across an array of price points, if you will. We have ultimately got to be price competitive. That's what drives consumer behavior more than anything else. And that's, I think, a big part of industry's consideration now. And a lot of other innovation and modernization needs to happen for that to take place, with information system modernization, with processing modernization, automation, a bunch of things happening behind the scenes to be able to be cost competitive and be able to hit a diverse array of different market needs. So that innovation piece is really important. And I also think Jason really laid out some of the key challenges in this highly diverse sector with getting to a unified message. And we absolutely need a unified message. We should not be asking the consumer to sort through reams of information to get to the right particular form of a product or a seafood type to eat. And that's going to require change in what's provided. It's going to require an enormous effort, I think, in really large-scale marketing. And to be able to develop a common, coherent message around the benefits of seafood consumption and how U.S. consumers can, in effect, develop greater trust in seafood products. Anything you buy should be sustainable, it should be responsibly sourced, and it should basically meet a very high U.S. standard for quality and for health benefits. So those are really key things. And all of this, I think, is going to really rely on a neutral source of credible, verifiable information. You want to dig in, and it's easy to dig in to find information sources these days. We've got to have, I think, a neutral venue or party or organization or capability that allows consumers to very readily sort fact from fiction and get to the essential information they need, and then be able to drill in if they want on any given species, on any given product, and get the information that they need about their consumption choices. So those are some small adds to the very, very good points that Jason made right at the outset.
Great, and thank you for that. I think the innovation piece is very interesting. The pre-competitive collaboration model has been used successfully in seafood to address innovation around sustainability challenges. But in other industries, it's used a lot for product development or delivery. It doesn't seem to be used as much in seafood. Potentially an interesting option there. So, Teresa, I just want to see if you had anything to add regarding what the U.S. can do to support more access to seafood and how we can do that in a way that supports planetary health.
Yeah, thanks, Ned. I think if we want people to eat more seafood, we have to be able to give them a variety of options in flavor profile, product forms, price points. And that means that it really does rely on a global market with sources coming from a lot of different places and also a lot of different types of fish coming. So I don't think this is an issue that we can solve by leaning entirely on domestic production. There are just fish that people really like that we can't produce here. But to Jason's point around all of these divisions in how we talk about fish, I think he's right that we also need to simplify the message. The challenge is that there's still a very broad implementation of sustainable fisheries management across the globe. And in the US, we've been very effective at implementing science-based fisheries management. And I think it's not only on us to continue to do that for the fish we produce here, but also think about the fish that we're buying from elsewhere in the world so that we can make a justifiable claim that everything that's coming into the US is sustainable. And that means effective implementation of the Seafood Import Monitoring Program. That means expansion of the program to cover all species, more information being provided to consumers, and frankly, us investing in the capacity development that developing world countries that produce so much of our fish need in order to hit those same standards of fisheries-based management. And this is, science-based fisheries management. This is really important because if we don't have those fish in the ocean as a result of good management and the growth and improvement of the fisheries, it's really hard to grow consumption. We can't eat what's not there. And so to talk about increasing consumption without also talking about ensuring the stocks are healthy and producing more fish, it isn't an argument that works unless they're joined together.
Excellent. Okay. Great answers, everybody. So moving on, along with the nutritional value, which we talked about and was covered earlier in the program, seafood is seen as a key element for making global food systems more sustainable and a part of a climate-friendly diet. And there's more and more research. Eat Lancet, the Stanford Blue Food Assessment coming out soon, high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, all pointing to the importance of seafood. So Teresa, I'll start with you. What are some of the considerations for balancing increased seafood consumption to contribute to more sustainable food systems while making sure that we're continuing to build well-managed fisheries?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I think about, and my work is primarily focused on wild fisheries, so this is not intended to disparage aquaculture at all. But one of the things that I think is really exciting about fisheries, it is that they are the ultimate regenerative food. It is one of the few proteins that we can access that, with good care and management, will reproduce and regenerate on its own. And that creates not only great opportunities for recovery, but also great opportunities for truly long-term sustainable management if we manage the fisheries effectively. There was some research that came out of UCSB that said that if we manage fisheries well, we can actually see an increase in capture fisheries between 35 and 70% or so. So we can get more fish out of the ocean to meet these nutritional needs while not compromising the sustainability of fisheries and the health of our ocean. So I think that's really exciting just from that point. I would also point out that as we look at broader impacts of food production and climate change, wild fisheries require no water, which we know in many places, and as many of us are experiencing right now when we're living through drought, wild fisheries require no water to produce. A number of fishing methods for capture fisheries also are very low carbon intensity in terms of their production. And so there is a lot of opportunity to meet multiple goals. But I think it's also important to remember that if the fisheries are not well managed first, this discussion again around relying on fisheries and food from the ocean in order to help meet these nutritional needs, it is irrelevant, because we have to make sure that those stocks are protected for the fishing communities and for the people who rely on it for food, whether it's local consumption or in terms of global trade.
Excellent. So Jason, just asking to follow up on Teresa, and from your perspective, can seafood differentiate itself as the healthy, consumer-friendly choice if we're not addressing these sustainability issues that are challenges for seafood right now?
I think Teresa touched on some really important topics there, and hit on a lot of that. But future food security is a big topic and a concern when looking at resources such as land and water. These resources are going to be under stress for the future. I think there's no denying that. Fresh water, arable land, those are going to be challenges for global food production. So, and then I think earlier was discussed about climate patterns, but those can not only impact the raising of animals, but also agricultural crops. When you think about over 70% of fresh water in the world that gets used in agriculture, and Teresa made the point about water utilization. I'll make the point about feed conversion ratios as well. I mean, seafood, when you're talking about aquaculture, they have very, very favorable feed conversion ratios versus their counterparts, terrestrial-based protein. So we're seeing improve, and those are continuing to improve. Now we're seeing a technology with algae being used in feed as a source of protein. Verimeris is doing great work with that. So we're talking about growing and harvesting seafood in natural water environments. So that's definitely utilizing a lot less resources to provide a very healthy protein. And that's why when we're talking about improving food security in this country, we really need to build up our fisheries and our aquaculture industries here in the United States. And getting back to some of just the great differentiation of seafood, look at some of the recent studies from that show that wild, genuine Alaska pollock has the highest protein efficiency ratio of all proteins, even more so than eggs, which have traditionally rated the highest. So that's just another example of many of the great differentiation that seafood has over proteins from a health standpoint. But I think Teresa did a good job covering a lot of the other global considerations.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Paul, so NOAA's doing a great job ensuring sustainable seafood from the U.S. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're doing and how other stakeholders can support that.
Well, I thank you, Ned, and it's a very complex system that's evolved over a long period. Teresa was talking about the importance of sustainable management of wild capture fisheries, and that we've reached we've developed a really solid, effective system for doing that in the United States. That evolved over a long time period. I mean, we're a good place now, but we weren't 20 years ago. And we've learned a lot along the way. Teresa's focusing on, and I think appropriately pointing to, the benefits of externalizing that. This is a global seafood system, and we need to have wild capture fisheries that are operating globally at a higher level. So there's an enormous amount of collaboration that needs to happen in that process of really kind of acculturating other producing countries to a standard of science-based sustainable management that's a whole lot more comparable to what we do here in the United States on a global basis. That's one whole level of collaboration. There's also a lot of collaboration that needs to happen, continue to happen around using the best available science. We have very capable laboratory networks around the United States in our organization, in fisheries, in the academic sector that we collaborate very closely with the states, with our industry partners. So continuing to advance the science and not just get complacent. Things are moving. There have been some references along the way to climate drivers and how our environmental conditions are changing. We really got to kind of advance the state of the art in ecosystem science and understanding living marine impacts so we can develop greater predictive capacity. So the collaboration, Ned, on the science front alone is huge, and I think needs to really be even more fully and roundly supported. We could definitely amp that effort up nationally and globally. And last, many of the good points that Jason was making about the sustainable nature of contemporary, sustainable food systems, the ones that we're most accustomed to, seafood production systems. There is still, and this harkens back to your last question, Ned, there's still a huge gap between the state of the art in sustainable fisheries production, distribution, management, and where the average consumer knowledge is. And I would say this is particularly the case in aquaculture. We have a huge gap between what people think aquaculture is all about and what it really is. And I've had the benefit of taking some congressional delegations to some contemporary farms like blue ocean mariculture out in Hawaii. It's one of the only kind of deep water cage culture operations, commercial operations that we have now in U.S. waters. And you bring people away from that and they're like, this is not at all what I thought aquaculture was about. It's incredibly sophisticated operation. They monitor and manage every environmental variable, and it is impressive what that type of production system can do. This has evolved through a lot of research, a lot of effort. People don't know about it. They have very antiquated images and understandings of aquaculture that we need to deal with. And that gets back to this issue of outreach, of marketing, and closing that gap between reality and consumer perception.
Great. Yeah, and I think we see that with fresh versus frozen as well.
True enough.
Hangover from seeing fresh is much better. So to take a little detour right now, and a question for you, we'll start off, Jason. Quarantine surprise has been that retail seafood sales have been up in the United States during the pandemic. How would you explain that? And do you see that trend continuing? Jason, you may be on mute, or you're very thoughtful.
So I was having a great conversation with myself. You just
I do my best work on
had a profound statement I just made. So I do think this is here to stay. Paul touched on it earlier in his presentation, and I think the pandemic has caused people to look more introspectively at their own health and ways they can improve through differentiating their diets. No doubt that seafood comes into the picture when folks are thinking through those things. With the unfortunate situation with restaurants during COVID, people are relying more on being home chefs and looking for new meal solutions. They probably relied on a few things that they knew about for a while, but they got tired of it, and now they're looking for new meal solutions. It was talked about earlier on the engagement in search engines and other ways that people are going to go seek information, and that's certainly something that we're seeing playing out in our business. But however, I do hope our restaurants come back strong, since they've always been a great source for people to experience and try seafood, not to mention a great source of innovation for seafood. So we definitely want to see them come back strong. But although the pandemic has been terrible for this country, no doubt, but from this we've seen increased seafood consumption, and we feel like that could be a positive outcome for longer term health in our communities. We've seen people that were eating seafood once or twice per month, maybe at the most, that are now eating seafood once or twice per week. So whether they're looking at cooking at home to enjoy seafood or going to a restaurant, we want to see that per capita consumption increase. So I guess in summary, I think the trend is here to stay, but we need to make sure we continue to provide a positive experience, and that's an obligation we have to take seriously if we want to be a solution for people's health and wellness. And we got to continue to innovate so we continue keeping customers who are shopping this category engaged and ultimately happy.
Great. Paul, are there ways we can help consumers be more confident in choosing seafood?
Yeah, we've touched on a number of things that need to come together, and in my mind, we shouldn't have to expect consumers to have to work really hard to figure out what to buy at the end of the day, and that's going to require an awful lot happening in the background that builds towards that level of consumer trust in what kind of seafood options are in front of them when they're in a store, in a restaurant, wherever they happen to be purchasing a seafood product. And they need to not have to figure out what's safe, what's sustainable, this type, that type, production method, farmed, wild, frozen, not. And a big part of that, I think, is just dealing with the information information gaps that we've been talking about through extensive outreach and marketing efforts. But a lot of real things also, in terms of the infrastructure of managing seafood, need to happen as well. Some of the issues that Jason and I were talking about with modernization and diversification of product form, but modernization of production process. Behind the scenes there are all the information systems that build traceability networks so that any purchaser of seafood knows exactly where. That's the full chain of control of that product is visible all the way along. So you have this whole supply chain custody of the information. One of the things that Teresa mentioned that we do on the government side, on the import front, is the Seafood Import Monitoring Program, and that's designed to ensure that these traceability systems are in place so that whatever label's on the product, we're checking to make sure that the traceability requirements that are embedded in that system on the harvest of that product is in place and correct. So there's a whole system of things that need to happen, but it all needs to boil down to a simple choice for consumers. And that's, I think, what we need to drive towards is a single positive message and the system behind it that allows for that level of trust.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So, Teresa, can you highlight any other ways we can maintain and grow this interest in seafood with consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to echo a lot of what Paul said. I don't think consumers should work hard. I think SNP and partners through the Eat Seafood America campaign are doing a great job getting people familiar with the culinary side of it and reintroducing people who maybe loved fish but didn't cook it at home back to how they prepare it at home. I think that's important. But I think the other really critical piece is around consumer confidence. And for all its flaws, the Marine Stewardship Council is the only global independent certification for sustainability. However, we also know that that's not enough for consumers. They also care about labor and health and safety of the fish that they eat. And I think this really calls upon the conservation organizations I work with, the seafood industry and governments, to be actually much more proactive around addressing some of those concerns. I think seafood has, in the last few years, really had some rough articles in the news come out around labor abuses, illegal fishing, really things that I don't think are widespread, but at the same time, the exposure is well deserved, and for those of us who work close in this field, not unexpected. And I think until the seafood industry takes a proactive approach at addressing these solutions these problems, as opposed to waiting for them to be exposed through investigative journalism or other means, I think we're always going to have that consumer uncertainty. And so really focusing on using transparency effectively and understanding and mapping supply chains and working not just with your direct sourcing, but on the system as a whole, a company's direct sourcing, working on the system as a whole in the production. And until we get to that point, I think there'll always be a little bit of consumer wariness. And I think our job is not to deflect from it, but actually show that we're moving forward and addressing this work. And I know, Ned, the work that you're doing with the Seafood 2030 platform is really trying to get to that, to try to get industry and governments and NGOs to work together to address these issues before they sort of bubble up and we have to do damage control. Because I think that ongoing confidence on what a great choice this is for our health and for our planet is going to be necessary if we want to keep this momentum up and in getting people to eat fish.
Great. I think that's a great point. And, the issue that Jason had raised earlier, feed conversion ratios, that's incredibly important when you're talking about global food systems. But when you're confronted with forced labor or slavery, it's really kind of hard to come back with the buoyancy and cold-blooded argument. It just doesn't work. So I think if seafood really does want to differentiate itself, it's going to need to address some of these issues. So kind of following up on that, there's been a great deal of interest in increasing seafood promotion or developing a seafood promotion entity in the U.S. Paul, we'll start with you. What should the priorities be for a promotion council or organization?
Thank you, Ned. And this speaks directly. I referenced earlier in my presentation a report from our Marine Fisheries Advisory Committee to the Department of Commerce, and This is pretty recent. It's publicly available report that folks can readily find. And they lay out and this is built on a really phenomenal job canvassing industry, talking to lots of folks from all over the country, different parts of the seafood industry, and looking at what would be the kind of unifying elements of a council of this nature. And they make a range of recommendations around this fundamentally being industry-led, and there's a lot of examples of industry coming together, and there's a whole kind of type of program that's actually run under USDA called a checkoff program, where a lot of campaigns that we're familiar with, got milk, pork, the other white meat, that came out of industry-wide marketing effort that was born of a lot of research, a lot of collaboration. And because of some of the attributes that we are familiar with the seafood industry, as I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of small pieces in different parts of the country and very, very diverse. Getting the kind of coherence that you need to have something as formal as a checkoff program just isn't possible, and it's certainly not possible right now in the environment that we're in, where people are just trying to make it through the year. So we need an industry-led, very focused on promoting U.S. seafood community, doing the type of education, research, promotion, marketing work that we've been talking about, but doing that at the level and with the scale and the scope that's needed to make an impact on the country as a whole. And that's going to require resources. So in addition to figuring out the central objectives of the council, it needs to be resourced. We need to have a thoughtful model about how it can evolve over time. And the mix of funding might change over time, but to get it started is going to require some public resources. That was MAFAC's recommendation. And it needs to have a good governance structure. So MAFAC was recommending that this be industry-led, but with oversight from NOAA, somewhat analogous to the way USDA provides oversight of these checkoff programs, but really is focused on a holistic approach to advancing many of the objectives we've been talking about, that consumer-facing message that's positive on seafood, that allows people to get to the underlying information and confirm whatever they need to know about the origin, nature, and environmental and health benefits of seafood production and consumption. So I think those big things of really setting out a set of national objectives, resourcing it right, getting a governance structure that works, given the structure and capabilities of industry right now, to get this going and use, really use contemporary marketing and engagement techniques to get to really diverse audiences in the United States, particularly younger people. You see dietary preferences sometimes change slowly. They definitely change with generations, and we're seeing a lot of interesting stratification of the market based on age and a number of other factors. So it's going to be a very sophisticated campaign, but ultimately have this consistent, common, positive message about the benefits of consuming seafood and the sustainability qualifications of seafood, if you will. This really pithy, good for people, good for the planet kind of connection that needs to be in people's minds, so they don't hesitate when it comes to an option to purchase seafood versus another protein form. So those are some of the big things, Ned. It is a topic that we've been discussing for decades. And I think we've finally gotten to a place, given where the industry was in the 80s versus where it is now, as well as the evolution of policy thinking about the public benefits of a stronger and more resilient seafood industry. We have a strong and I think very smart mode of democratic capitalism in the United States, and we believe in largely free market driven modes of development. But if you look into the world of food, the world of agriculture, these are very, very deep and long-standing public-private partnerships that allow the industry to grow, to innovate, and to exist the way that it does. And I think we need to get more sophisticated in the seafood world and really kind of get closer to the level of sophistication that we have in land-based agriculture, from the tech base all the way through to a lot of the economic policies that support a vibrant agriculture and we hope seafood industry as well. So looking at this in a true public-private way, we have enormous public benefits that we've all been talking about today: health benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits from a stronger, more resilient seafood sector. And we've got to pull together the public and the private sector so that you get the best of both worlds, the maximum benefit to the public and the maximum growth opportunity for industry. And that's going to require this type of collaboration.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So, Jason, I wanted to ask you what else the seafood industry can do to better promote the brand seafood. And I wanted to ask you also specifically about retailers. If we do come up with a great seafood slogan, is that something you pick up because you're trying to promote seafood consumption, or do you really not care if you're selling chicken or beef or seafood? So just a little bit about kind of how you could use this promotion.
Yeah, it's a good question, and Paul touched on it. I mean, there's other councils out there that have national representation for their message. And again, getting back to a cohesive message, we really need to tap into that and be able to leverage that with our customers. So I think the more we can take confusion out of things, we're going to be the better off. And building trust and so forth with customers is super important. It should be a frictionless experience trying to learn more about seafood, not very cumbersome, which it tends to be at times, and that was brought up as well. But we really just need to get credit for the great things that are happening in seafood. Seafood shouldn't really be seen as a environmental challenge. Like it tends to get cast that shadow sometimes. And if we don't tell our story, someone else will. Others will tell our story, and that's why I think we always need to hold our food systems to a high level. And while there are challenges in the seafood industry, we're not denying that. We shouldn't let those challenges define the industry or allow the actions of a few represent the whole. And we definitely need more advocates. Linda and her team can't do it all. The industry needs to engage stakeholders like health professionals and chefs and others to help us tell that story and to make sure people are understanding more about seafood and we demystify seafood. We need to also, getting back to promotions, we do have National Seafood Month, and I'm not sure if the average American can tell you that it's in October. We're working on that. But what is the challenge we're giving to the American public when we do have something like a National Seafood Month? Is it to put signage up and run promotions? I mean, that could be part of it. But what exactly do we want Americans to take away from National Seafood Month? And what is that challenge we need to put out there, whether they engage somehow through social media or through an app or something? But we really need every January, Americans make resolutions. New diet, exercise regime, and so forth. But again, how can we engage with them to promote the seafood brand and its health benefits more so than we're doing today? And I think that's really the challenge of the industry. And we have to do more, certainly at the end user level in retail and restaurants, to build that trust and to make people feel more confident about it. So we're just as part of the seafood industry is anyone out there who's capturing fish or processing fish. We have an obligation to lead people into a better health and wellness journey, and that's a serious challenge. We have to be able to make that experience positive, because if we don't do our job correctly, then we're not helping the brand either. So those are things that we have to think about from where it's captured and how it gets to our customer. The role that we all play in being able to promote that brand. And hats off to Linda and her team and the work they've been doing. But I just think it's going to take a collective. They can't do it all themselves. It's going to take a collective effort to make it happen. And those are my thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Teresa, I think there's a panel coming up at 3:30, so we probably have to end soon, but I'll give you the last opportunity to weigh in here. And what are your thoughts on how we get to 26 pounds per capita seafood consumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we can get kale into quick service restaurants, anything is possible, right? I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't see seafood take off in the American diet. I think the the Seafood Council is going to be really important to get the word out, but I also think that, I don't know that we necessarily believe the sustainability story of like plastics councils. And so there really needs to be substance behind that. And that's got to be a whole of company approach, not just marketing, not CSR. We have to have the companies that are participating in this thinking about legal, procurement, IT, finance, HR, and how those bolster the sustainability and the health of the fisheries that they provide to their customers. I also think we need to continue to focus on a diversity of supply to meet needs, whether it's a fish sandwich or a high-end sashimi meal. We need to engage a diverse range of chefs and cuisines so that it reflects the diversity of the consumers that we're trying to bring into the seafood space. And I think if we can both build trust in the sustainability messages and the health messages, as well as provide consumers with something that reflects what they enjoy and what they value, I think getting to 26 pounds will be no problem. But again, we have to make sure the fish are there and available for us to be able to do that.
Hey, Ned, this is Paul. Hearing what Teresa's saying, I'd like to offer just a very pithy closing comment on this question, if not the panel. When we talk about all these requirements, we're sitting here under the broad leadership of Linda Cornish and the Seafood Nutrition Partnership Program. And if I were to put bets on a solution to this, I'd put them on Seafood Nutrition Partnership Program, stepping up and doing the type of things that we've been talking about for a National Seafood Council. All these attributes that Teresa just laid out, the credibility, science-based, neutral, cutting across every segment of the stakeholder community and really pushing a consumer-facing positive message. We can do it.
Awesome. Great way to end the panel. And thank you to everyone for providing input to that. Linda, along with your new marching orders from Paul, I just wanted to see, I wasn't sure how we're doing on time. If you do want to answer some questions from the audience, or if we should wrap it up.
I think we are running, of course, a little short on time. And so what we'll do is ask the panel to get together at 4 o'clock. There's a session just for the panel to answer questions. And so we invite everybody, there's almost 93 people here to come and chat with you at 4 o'clock. And so you'll have a networking session. Is that right? Just for this panel. So thank you. That was so informative. Thank you all for just being on this panel today. And I'll meet you over at the networking panel later on.